that emotion is the essence of what people are saying, right? And so often, most of us listen to respond, right? And before people are even done formulating their sentence, we're responding with what we want to say. And that's completely different than actually listening, not to respond, but listening to the essence of what people are saying. On today's episode, we talked about coherent communication and how to effectively communicate so we can have better communication with not only loved ones, but people around us. We hope you enjoy. Welcome back to the Healing Works podcast. Excited to be with you here today. Today's topic, we're going to talk about coherent communication and why coherent communication is so not only important, but so effective, right? And when we look at the world that we live in, not the world of, but the world that we live in, I mean, communication is always happening. And so when we look at communication in a whole, I mean, it's how we, speak to people. It's how we accomplish things by talking to people and getting things done. But there's another, we have the speaking part, obviously, the speaking part, the verbal part. And then most people know about body language, right? If you're standing with your hands in your hips and I'm like, hey, I'm going to go to the gym, and you're like, fine, then I know that, she doesn't do that.
You've seen that meme. I think I talked about a meme last time too.
Nope.
The meme that's like, if she says fine, it means this. If she says okay, it means this. Like, the translation,
right.
Really, what it actually means.
Yeah, we're all familiar with body language. If my shoulders are slumped over and I'm in a hunched position, that suggests something quite different if I'm talking about, gratitude, but I'm hunched over and things like that. People don't get the right, the proper message.
They don't get the right vibe.
Right.
The vibe doesn't match what you're saying.
So, we have the verbal communication, we have the physical communication in body language, but then there's also a different form of communication, which is the most powerful form of communication, and that's energetic communication, right? And so when we look at energetic communication, our heart's magnetic field, right? Every time your heart beats, produces electricity. Every time you have electricity, you get a magnetic field. Magnetic fields contain information, right? Like with our cell phones. The cell phones contain the information of your text message, of your picture message, of your voice memo, of when you call someone, they can, magically hear your voice on the other end. All of that digital information is being transmitted over magnetic fields. Cell phone towers transmit those fields, and we can call somebody all across, the country, all across the world, and they can pick up the phone and instantaneously hear our voice. So it transfers information very, very quickly. But then what happens with your heart's magnetic field and also your brain's magnetic field, the electricity produced by the brain, is your heart's magnetic field carries the information of our emotions. And so that's why we can walk into a room, not say anything at all, and you can kind of gauge what the feeling in the room is, right? If there's people that are angry, if there's people that are happy, if there's people,
if there's sorrow or fear,
whatever it is, our heart's magnetic field transmits those emotional frequencies, and our nervous systems are tuned to these frequencies, right? That's why they call it striking a nerve. And when somebody says something you don't like, because a little different, but the point is that our nervous systems, hearts and minds are tuned to these emotional frequencies and also frequencies of thought. So whatever we're thinking and feeling, our emotions and thoughts are registered in the brain waves of those that are around us. And so you could say nothing at all, and people can kind of gauge what's going on, how you're feeling, right? That's why you're like, not only through body language, but, that's why you ask your friends or your family, whatever, like, hey, is everything okay? It may not be the expression on their face, but you might just sense their emotions being put out in their magnetic field, and not just might, you do, right?
You're picking up on that for sure.
And so when that's why it's so important for us to, with heart math, we say, what are we feeding the field? Right. And so let's break down that energetic communication, because there's two parts of communication. And one is the words that we say. But how often when you're speaking to people, do the words not match the emotions? Right. And so when you're trying to get your point across, a lot of people get frustrated because people aren't hearing them. And it's not that they're not hearing the words, it's just the emotions are drowning out the words, right?
Well, and the emotions on both sides, right? Because we can only, receive that information through our perspective lens. So what someone is saying may not add up to their emotional state, and then the receiver might not be, they're receiving it through their perception of how things are. And so that's why so much miscommunication happens. And if you can get good at looking past maybe what's even being said and the behavior, and connect to the wisdom in the lesson that's being shown, or the real problem that's kind of being presented before you, and cut through that miscommunication, and you stay in a place of peace, then you can kind of go, what are you really telling me? What are you actually saying? Instead of getting caught up in the drama of what's going on or what someone is bringing before you.
And I'm glad you brought that up. I was going to, put that in get to that in a little bit, but it's very good to start with that, meaning I preface things all the time, and Altee's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, wait for it.
Yeah. But he says, did you see that? I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Oh my gosh, that's good, huh? I don't know.
But see, that's a form of miscommunication, right? So when we look at communication in a whole, what we've studied is that 70% of relationship issues, workplace issues, all stem back to miscommunication.
Even medical mistakes.
So medical mistakes, and even people getting into accidents, like severe medical accidents, that's about 66%, but miscommunication in relationships and workplace is about 70%. So we're, in the same rough percentile, but 70% is because of miscommunication. That's pretty bad.
That's a lot. That's a lot of drama and trouble.
So 7 out of 10 issues.
Yeah.
Like sometimes you say 70%, and that's a large number, but 7 out of 10 miscues in relationships and in the workplace stem back to miscommunication.
Could be resolved if there was clear communication and understanding.
And that's a pretty simple fix. So we'll talk about, how to make that better. But when you look at communication, so 7 out of 10 times, where am I when I'm communicating with people, right? What state of being am I in? Meaning, what am I feeling and what am I thinking? Mm-hmm. And when we look at that, so the way it's described is communication is like a song. And I wish Lexi was on this one too, because we message each other all the time about songs. And I'm prefacing again, but so there's the lyrics to the song, and then there's the melody. Mm-hmm. And the bottom line is, which one do you hear first? And it's usually the melody, right? The energy in the song. The rhythm, the music, the guitar, the drums, the piano. Typically we hear that first, and then we hear the lyrics second. And that's easily identified because what I was just alluding to with Lexi is Altee and I and Lexi, we go back and forth all the time, because I'll hear a song from high school and I'm like, I didn't know it said that, because
you have the lyrics
I didn't
the whole
hear
time.
the lyrics because I was caught up in the melody, right? I was caught up in the energy of the music. And so, all the time we'll message each other back and forth. It's like, oh, did you know it said this? And it's pretty funny. But what that suggests, obviously, is that melody is what is not only heard first, but felt first. And so there's two parts to our communication. We have the lyrics of what we say, the verbiage that we use, but then the other part and the more powerful part is what emotion is carrying and being displayed in that melody of our communication. And so, we see it with, kids all the time and communicating things to kids. And it's like, clean your room. And it's like, they didn't hear clean your room because we're so frustrated that the room hasn't been cleaned for 3 weeks that all they hear is like,
is you suck and you don't do anything right.
Yeah. Is you don't do anything, so clean your room. Right. So, and that's not necessarily what we're trying to convey, but that's what comes out first. And so that's where we have to be very hyper aware of what emotional state we're in, because that will translate to those around us. Right. Just like we just said, whether or not we're conscious of it, our emotions and thoughts register in the heart fields and the brain waves of people around us. And so, as we start to become better at communicating, it really just stems back to how we become better is to stem back to and go back to what state of being are we in, right? Is to be hyper cognizant of our emotions and our thoughts in the moment, right? Is how are we feeling and how are we thinking? Because if I want to communicate something effectively, but I'm already, in a frustrated state, and most of us know this, right? We just become a little aloof to that sometimes, but we make a phone call immediately after something happens, and it's like, we probably should pause and wait for a minute before we, when we find something out, calling someone and blasting them, because they're not going to hear what we're saying. They're just going to hear the anger and frustration.
You're not going to convey the concern in an objective way, and they're certainly not going to hear it. So being able to take that pause and respond, and maybe even still present the situation. Sometimes things don't need to be addressed and sometimes they do, but if you can pause, shift, and reset, then you can do it from a more objective standpoint, and they will have a better possibility of hearing what you're saying and be a little more receptive to it.
Right. And so that pause, shift, and reset obviously is pausing, shifting by heart-focused breathing in the moment, right? Calming down, nervous system, calming down our emotional state, and then shifting to an elevated state, even just of peace, right? We may not have to like what's going on, but can we find peace in the moment, right? We don't have to be uber grateful if something needs to be addressed. But can we be at least at peace or calm or in a state of ease? Yes.
And I think that is one thing that we can all do to start implementing this, and maybe not, perfect it right away, but just noticing, okay, I'm going to just make it a point this week to not respond to anything or react to anything until I can get myself into a state of peace. Because we've all done it where we've done both, right? We kind of take that breath and it's like, okay, what's really wrong here? And then we've all reacted in a way that really just added gasoline to the fire. I remember one time that I really used this, I didn't know that I was, that gave me a lot of insight into why this is so beneficial. And I'm not perfect at it by any means. There's been plenty of times I've reacted poorly to situations and got emotionally escalated like any normal human being does. But I remember once when Kaylee, my 17-year-old, she was 4 and she was going in, we were getting ready. She was, had surgery scheduled. She had nasal polyps, and that was, something that comes along with cystic fibrosis. And, so she was 4 and we were getting ready for surgery, and I was, nervous about it a little bit, but I was trying to stay calm because I knew that, parents set the tone for their kids, and she was in total meltdown, like screaming, kicking the cupboards, throwing stuff. And I was like, just stay calm. Just stay calm. It's not going to be helpful to get worked up over it. And I said, honey, what's really wrong? And she goes, I'm scared. And that's what was wrong, And I think that like it would have been super easy. And there's been times that I have reacted that way. Just stop doing that. Get your stuff. We got to go, and you just start to really engage in that drama with them. And then it adds gasoline to the fire. And then you're frustrated, unreasonable. They're frustrated and unreasonable. But me staying in that place of peace and saying, what's really wrong? She was able to identify it and then articulate it. And then we came up with a solution. And we had gone to Smith's Marketplace, the week before, and there were these little high heels that she found. And Smith's Marketplace was up on Foothill on our way to Primary Children's Medical Center where she was having her surgery that day. And I said, listen, I'll tell you what, if we can get ready early and we can leave early enough, we'll stop at Smith's Marketplace and see if they have those high heels. And if they have the high heels and you can wear those in, and I think that would, help you. Do you think that would help you be brave? And she said, yes. So we did. We got ready early and stopped, and they had the heels. They were a little big on her, but she wore them, and they helped her be proud. And she walked herself to the operating room because she was able to turn her emotions around from that fear to courage because she came up with a solution, and we did together. But, they told me, they said, we have yet to ever see a 4-year-old walk herself to the operating room in a pair of high heels. Usually they sedate them in the pre-op room and then take them down in a wagon or whatever. And she's like, nope, I got it. But it turned from fear to courage and empowerment because she was able to identify what was actually going on. But I think had I engaged in that drama of fear with her or frustration, then we wouldn't have been able to come to a solution that really turned it into a thing of empowerment and talk in the hospital of how funny that was.
Right. That's a great story. And how great is that? But how often does that happen the opposite way, where someone comes to us in frustration and we meet them in frustration, and then things just kind of go sideways, right? And then a couple days later, it's like, oh, well, I didn't know you meant that. So, you know what I mean? Like, that's very vague, but everyone probably
once the
understands
dust
what
is
I'm saying.
settled and you can see things a little more clearly and objectively, it's like, oh, okay, well, that's what it actually was. And my overreaction didn't help.
Well, and obviously in that overreactionary state, we're not thinking clearly. We don't have, higher cognitive function. So, and our emotions are all over the place. So how often, for everyone that's listening, how often have you said something and then you go back a couple days, maybe a couple hours later, maybe a day or two later, maybe weeks or months later, and say, you know what? I said something and I totally didn't mean that. Because, that's why they say cooler heads prevail when you allow that pause, shift, and reset, when you allow yourself to calm yourself down in the moment. And that's why it's so imperative. But when we look at that energetic communication, we know it's affecting people around us, whether or not we're conscious of it or not, because we've highly studied this. So HeartMath highly studied this, where they put 40 people in a room. There are 4 people per table, and 3 people were trained in heart coherence to shift to a coherent state, right? Because it's a buildable skill. They were trained with our technology, our EM Wave Pro, or our heart rate variability monitors, and they were trained to be in a coherent state. So the 4th person at the table didn't know what the exercise was. It was a blind placebo test. They didn't know what the exercise was, but they were all hooked up to heart rate variability monitors, electrodes on their chest, and then on their brain as well. And when the 3 people that were instructed in heart coherence shifted to a expanded coherent state, the 4th person's heart rate variability improved, meaning that they were shifting to a more coherent state, not knowing what was going on.
Just because the environment
environment around them was shifting. And that's the point. It's not just what we're saying to people, right? It's not just when we're walking down the street is whether we're saying hi with a smile or whether we're saying get out of my way, right? regardless of if we're saying that or not, when we're walking down the street and people are around us, our emotional attitude, our state of being is affecting other people around us. So that's why we say, what are you feeding the field, right? That's why that's that self-check every so often throughout the day. Like, what am I feeding the field? Am I making it easier for people, or am I making it more difficult because I'm either adding some gratitude and care and appreciation and peace and calm, or am I making it more difficult for people by adding to the stress that's already in our environment, right? Am I adding more frustration? Am I adding discontent? Am I adding, unhappiness? Am I adding these worry and concern? Which one am I adding? And the people around us can sense it, right?
Absolutely. Well, and one thing that maybe you can all try this week is to implement being a coherent listener. Maybe that's just something that you can focus on as you're listening. Can you stay in a state of coherence? So if someone comes to you and is expressing their complaints or their dramas or their frustrations, can you sit there and focus on you maintaining a state of peace? Can you breathe? Someone's talking to you, breathe in 5 seconds in your nose and 5 seconds out your mouth, or, it doesn't have to be super obvious, but just make that intention. I'm being a coherent listener. I'm going to stay in peace while they bring this to me, and I'm going to set the tone for this conversation. And notice if that's something that's normal for you, or if that's something that's a skill that needs to be built. And as you do that, that's what you're feeding the field. You, as they're feeding frustration, you're feeding peace, and you're doing your part to shift that vibration around you. And I think that is something that's really helpful that we can all focus on, is being a coherent listener. And remember, that state of coherence is when mind, body, and spirit are in optimal alignment. So when we say coherence, we're just in that state of alignment. Our mind, body, and emotions are balanced, and we're in a place of peace and harmony. And so focusing on ease, calm, and peace.
Right. And that's a great practice, because I do that every time I'm listening to somebody, because another little tidbit on that is that emotion is the essence of what people are saying. Right. And so often, most of us listen to respond, right? And before people are even done formulating their sentence, we're responding with what we want to say. And that's completely different than actually listening, not to respond, but listening to the essence of what people are saying. And when we start listening to the essence, that's where we start diminishing that 70%. Right? It's probably going to happen, some of the time, but can we diminish that to 20% of the time? Right? Can we diminish that to 10% of the time? Because we're typically, most of us are so accustomed to, listening, and instead of listening to the essence of what they're saying, we're already formulating that response, and we kind of tune them out, right? So we're not even listening to that essence. So the more we become good at this coherent communication, the more we become good at this coherent listening, and we start listening for the essence of what people are saying, and really gathering, like, how much more wisdom will we learn? Because there are so many intelligent people that have so many good things to say, and I think we miss a lot of it. I mean, not only, I think obviously evidence shows that we miss a lot of it. Yep. So the more we are present in the moment, and that's the thing too, is being in that coherent state, that optimal alignment of heart, mind, and emotions, or mind, how did you say it?
Mind, body, spirit.
Mind, body, spirit. Thank you. As I just blinked because I'm starving. Sorry. But mind,
Kevin.
body, spirit, you become not only a better listener, but you become more receptive to the message, right? And then when we're more receptive to the message, then we can deliver a better response, right? When we're, even with like an apology, when someone comes to you, it's called a heartfelt apology, right? Not a brain felt apology. When someone comes to you with a heartfelt apology, it's hard to stay in a state of anger or resentment or frustration towards that person, because you can't argue with that elevated emotion of care or, or appreciation or compassion that they're displaying, saying, you know what, I'm really sorry. And when that's displayed from heart, that energetic communication a lot of the time overrides those words, and those words are important, but it's how you make people feel, right? Well, that's Mary Angelou, right? Mary Angelou, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. It's the way you make people feel. And I could have just totally hashed that. So don't hold me to that one, but it's the way we make people feel, right? That's what's remembered. It's not the words that are said, and great words are great, right? Great words of encouragement or adoration, great words of peace and harmony are always great, but it's really the way people make us feel and the way we make people feel, right?
And if you are in a state of peace and calm and ease and grace, then that's what you share with those around you. And the world would be a much different place if everybody could work on their own state of coherence and be less worried about what everyone else is doing around them and, what they should be saying or doing, and that they're not. If everybody just stayed in their own business, stayed in coherence, and then we all communicated from there, we'd have a lot more understanding with one another, and be in a better state of peace ourselves.
Right. Well, and one other thing that amplifies, the state of being in communication is drama, right? It's when we have a situation or someone says something to us, we take that, and then what's our first instinct? Is to call our friend or to call the next person and say, hey, guess what happened? And we over dramatize. That's a good one too. Over dramatize what happened. And then not only are we over dramatizing that to ourselves, right? But there's that initial phase of drama. But what exacerbates the problem is the over dramatification, right? The brooding, the going over it over and over, the rehashing and hashing and rehashing. And what we know is that most of the time we distort things the way they happen by about 50%, right? We over dramatize it and over amplify it, over exaggerate it, misremember it. And then we're, going to other people, telling them what happened and blah, blah, blah. Then, we talk to one person and we don't get all our words out or all our energy out. Then we got to call someone else, and we call the people around us and let them know what happened. But the danger in that is not only are we overplaying what happened, probably to an extent that maybe isn't true anymore.
It's inaccurate.
But then how much time are we spending creating more drama, right? How long are we staying in that? But then how many other people are we affecting by it? Because maybe those people are having a peaceful day and we're like, oh my gosh, guess what happened? Guess what Joey said to me? And then guess what Joey did, or whoever Joey is. I don't know who Joey is, but you know what I mean? And then we rob people of their peace. And then, if they go tell it to someone else, they rob people of their peace. And we're so used to, that's why a lot of religions and, businesses really put a big emphasis on not gossiping, right? Or not, talking ill about other people, because it robs everyone of their peace, not only the person that it's happening to, but the other person. So the point is that can we not only communicate in a coherent state, but can we stay in a coherent state, in a peaceful state enough to where if somebody says something to us, can we process that and let it go? Right.
Well, and I think too, we all need someone to talk to or feedback or whatever, but I think that it's important to pause, shift, and reset. So if something comes up, if there's, if you're offended or something comes up that you're having a hard time processing or working through, if you can, rather than calling up your friend and rehashing it out again, find that place of peace before you and get into a more objective place to discuss what just happened and maybe get some support if you need it or feedback. But you get into that place of peace before you take that to somebody else. So again, you're not disrupting their day or their state of being.
Their peace. Yeah. And so try that this week. Like Altee said, try this coherent communication technique. Do your heart focused breathing before. That's 5 seconds in through the nose, 5 to 7 seconds out through the mouth. Imagine that it's flowing in and out of your heart. Shift to a at least peaceful state, if not gratitude, appreciation, compassion, care, ease, calm. And then from that more objective place, then make the phone call, then send an email, then talk to, the person you need to talk to about something, whether it's, your partner, your kids, your boss, your coworkers, whatever it is. When you take that moment and pause, shift, and reset before communicating to anybody, you'll find that the communication goes that much better. And we want to diminish that 70% of miscommunication. That's the goal.
Right. And not jump on that emotional roller coaster with whoever you're talking to or listening to. And, getting good at just doing that breathing during and maybe being more objective, either by presenting the situation. If you're the speaker, if you're the coherent listener, you doing that breathing and staying in a place of peace and being objective. If someone brings a complaint to you, maybe saying, that's tough. What do you think you should do? Or what are your options? And then you can look past the complaints and past the emotion and help people come up with some solutions on how to get out of it instead of fueling that fire of emotional dysregulation. And then you end up getting worked up, and then you go into judgment over the person they're talking about. It's like, that's tough. They must be going through something. What do you think you should do? Or what do you think? Where do we go from here? And I think if you kind of get a couple of phrases like that down, where do you go from here? What do you think? Then it causes that disruption in that emotional dysregulation, and then it causes you to be more objective. Right. It calms things down instead of heightens them.
Right. Can you be the stopping point? Mm-hmm. Right.
Yep.
And can you shift to a better state of being so it better informs your attitudes, which then will affect your choices, decisions, behaviors, and so on. So
absolutely. And let us know if you have we love the feedback. We love the messages. And so let us know if there was a time that you were able to implement it. We'd love to share stories. If you have any questions, or we'll probably post a Q&A and do an episode on that. If you have something that you want us to cover, anything like that. We love the feedback. We love the interaction. And we appreciate, all that are listening and subscribing and all the support. It means a lot to us. And we want to keep sharing a message of hope and emotional resilience.
Yeah, I'll echo that. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing this with your friends and whoever you share it with. We appreciate all that are listening. And again, thank you for listening to the Healing Works podcast, where we impact lives by healing your heart and mind so you can live your best life.